Okay, so we've gone through 1 week of the course, and at this point, let me ask you if you have any questions. I want to make sure I get to them during this session. Is there anything you wanted me to address today?
I do not have any questions.
Okay, thanks, Krissa. Jennifer, Dean?
Yes, I was curious to know about sort of the dialogue expectations when it comes to the replies in the discussions.
Okay, what are you thinking about when you ask me that?
Well, are there specific objectives you would like us to meet?
Okay,
I guess that's what I.
All right. So in the syllabus itself for the discussions, what it says is you respond to the question, and then after that, you're supposed to have 3 to 5 peer responses during the rest of the week. And so what you're asking me is what kind of peer responses to make, right? Obviously, something a little bit more than that was a great response. Think about furthering the conversation. So you can add on to what someone has already said as an agreement, or do you have a follow-up question to what they have? Maybe you don't fully agree with what they're saying, so you could pose it as, have you considered an alternative view? Or I interpreted this theory in another way. So you're trying to create a larger dialogue going on the topic that we're talking about. So does that help at all?
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you. That was exactly what I was asking.
Right. And so in these comments, you could also draw in from other readings, right? So if someone has talked about, say, the Ilaris reading, and you see some connection with something from Baumgartner, you can draw from that as well and say, hey, I saw this connection. Or it could be a resource somewhere completely outside of what is there, and you can bring resources in. Or you could relate it to personal experience as well. So it's just deepening the conversation that we're having and getting us to see a topic from different perspectives. So hopefully that will give you some kind of an idea. Now, the first module itself, I will give you more in-depth feedback on your discussion posts. And that should help you looking ahead, as in how can I frame my discussion posts for the modules coming up. So the first one is kind of a scaffolding discussion that will help you through the other discussions as well. And don't worry if you're completely way off the mark. As I'm reading through them, I will send you a personal email and say, hey, maybe you should be adding something else into it. So the other thing I want you to think about when you're posting these discussion posts is remember to bring in the readings and make a note of which source you're drawing this information from as well. That'll help you with writing up your papers and your autobiography, the learner autobiography and things like that, right? So remember to connect it to the readings as well. Don't make people guess. Okay. During this virtual hour, of course, answering questions, but also I just wanted to give a brief overview of what I was looking at when I was looking at the readings, and maybe just asking you all what you thought about it as well. And I think one of the fundamental questions for me when I look at this particular module itself is the basic question of, what do you think learning is? And I'd love to hear from the three of you. What do you think learning is? There's no right or wrong answer, so you can just throw out anything you think of here.
Well, for me, learning's evolved over a long period of time because when I was younger, I was learning all kinds of new things. But as I got older and more focused on my career path, I was learning a better depth of the cursory information that I already knew and getting into a depth. Well, now that I'm changing career paths, it's a lot of both, only faster. And what I thought even before this class, was that, oh, I'm a good learner, I have good skill sets, I can learn things very quickly. And that has been a way to do things for me for a long period of time. But because the way people learn has changed, I can't rely on that anymore. So I'm actually learning even more about myself and what kind of a learner. There's the chart with the kite, and mine is basically a straight line. I learn in two very specific spheres or hemispheres. And so to learn things that I don't have a basic knowledge of quickly, I've discovered that it's much more difficult, and especially doing it online or in a non classroom environment, because there are so many nonverbal cues that I miss. And just by doing the reading and not having that touch point every day or
Mhm.
every other day is very interesting on how I'm dealing with it. I've made some steps to do some touch points just for myself, but I consider this Zoom meeting one of the touch points, and I'm incorporating things that I never thought I would before. So that's just my 2 cents.
And something you said over there is what we're looking at in the readings as well, right? You said learning something new is taking you longer. And that's because it is new, because you have no point of reference. And when we read about andragogy and adult learners, a lot of what we do is building on the schema we already have, relating it to prior knowledge. And when we don't have any base to build on, it takes us longer, because now we've got to create a whole new frame of reference. And so it's natural for it to take more time. The other thing you mentioned was that you've changed over time, you found, and that will happen as adults as we grow, because remember, physically as well, we're changing, and those things also affect how we process knowledge and information. So our cognitive abilities change, our physical abilities, I mean, how well we see things changes, and that affects how well you're going to learn or how quickly you learn, right? So every factor in that makes a difference to the learning process itself. Jennifer, did you want to jump in?
Yes. So I think for me, learning is an active process. So I am actively doing something, or I'm actively present and paying attention and listening and having a conversation. And that for me is learning.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
again, okay, so I have to be upfront and transparent here. For me, andragogy and the assumptions of andragogy have resonated with me very strongly. A lot of what we do as adults, I feel, have been captured in that. Is it a theory? Maybe not, but it explains a lot of what we do. And like you said, active learning, being there and doing it, right? And for adults, you want something that'll have meaning and purpose. And that goes to what you were saying as well, Dean. When we know something, I mean, when it is relevant to us, I'm learning it for my job for this specific purpose, and I'm going to see a result in it immediately. That is a great motivation for us. So that's another factor that works as well. Okay. The other thing that I was thinking is, right, now we were looking, one of the readings talks about behaviorism, and that was the earliest learning theory that was put forward, and you have the change in behavior. My question here to you all would be, does learning have to result in a change in behavior? If I just learn random pieces of information and it's all there and I can just spout it out for you like an encyclopedia, is that not learning?
That sounds more like memorizing.
Okay, so for you, learning would have to result in something actionable.
Well, I think it's yes, and just memorizing, you don't have the right foundation to then build on that. You have to learn it. Memorizing is a portion for sure, because 50% of learning new things is learning the language of it, because there are acronyms and all kinds of new words that you have to look up. Sometimes I do, at least. And so, but then you have to apply it to something tangible or intangible, but it has to create, I think, something relatively new, a new adjustment in the way you think about something. I think that's truly the depth of learning that I'm at least going for.
Okay. Krissa, Jennifer, any thoughts? Oh, sorry, Krissa. I was just asking, does learning mean that there has to be a change in your behavior?
I mean, gosh, that's tricky. So, yeah, I think I agree with Krista. No, not necessarily. I think it depends. It depends on
Yes.
the context.
It is nuanced, right? It depends on the context of what we're talking about as well. And I wonder if industrialization has also influenced how we see learning, right? Because if you look at workforce development and all, what is their intention behind the training they give? I'm going to give you this training so that your practice at work changes and hence you're more productive, right? There's this very linear capitalistic view of learning over there, and that's the focus, that you need to be better at something and hence I'm going to be training you for that, and there's that motivation for learning. And so in those instances you do need a change in behavior, but does it always have to be a change in behavior? And that's something that, like I said, there is no right or wrong answer to it, right? There are some concepts that we can learn at a very deep level and really understand it, but I might never put it into practice. So it just depends. Although I do have to say that you're right. If I don't put it into practice, that knowledge is not going to stay with me for a long time, because it's repetition and bringing the information out from your long-term memory into your short-term memory and, processing it all the time. That's what keeps it alive in your mind. And it's when we get facts that we never use in our lives, they just vanish. And the vanishing happens faster as we get older. But so it's a tricky question. But for most of our readings, you will notice it is all focused on changing behavior and perceptions. Yes, Dean, perceptions, how you make meaning of the world. When you come into transformative learning, the theory of transformative learning really is focused on transforming the world around you. So there's an extreme social justice focus to that. And so you want to think about how you're doing that. Now, as we're going through these, I am going to throw out some of these not very mainstream questions. For example, with transformative learning, right, when we do want to change the world, social justice is a great thing. But is it our role as educators to get our learners to think a certain way? Or is it our role as learners to show them how to think, but then what they think is up to them? So those are fine nuances over there. And you want to think about what your role is as an educator. Because as you're learning about how people learn, you also want to think about how are you going to help them? And at the same time, what is my role in this educational process? So for adult education itself, one interesting conversation that I've been listening to recently between colleagues is, one person feels that adult education has to focus on giving people basic skill sets so that they can go out, get a job, and bring home money so that they can feed themselves and have a roof above their heads, right? That's the most basic needs that Maslow has. So what do you think about that? Would that be a correct perception of adult education?
I think it's more than that. I think you have to get into the second level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In fact, my wife and I just talked about this the other night. because she's dealing with educating new PAs and people that come into the ER. And once you hit your basic needs are met, there's more to it than that. And you have to not necessarily change your behavior, but your perceptions of reality should change, or at least be added to, so you can explore your reality more specifically and grow and possibly be able to teach your peers. Because my favorite thing about teaching people, I always learn something new about what I'm teaching. And that part, especially with adult learners, if you don't get that part of the fulfillment, then you're just basically memorizing, and you're never going to get past that first level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think it bridges that gap. At least it should at least give a step to the next level, I think.
Right. Jennifer? I'm only calling on Jennifer because I see a green thing around you, so I feel like you're turning on your microphone. That's all. Carissa, jump in as well. Okay, I won't put you on the spot. So the other version of the same thing, like Dean was saying, is adult education should go beyond that. We should be teaching critical thinking skills. And the other person's view is getting them a job and all that, that should not be our focus. Our focus should be on critical thinking skills for adult learners. And like you were saying, Dean, I am not in the zero-sum camp. It's this and that, because you do need people to have basic skill sets to be able to get a job and to feed themselves. I mean, let's just be realistic. If I can't feed myself, anything else is out the window, right? And we know poverty causes you so much stress that you can't do higher order thinking because you're so limited by the immediate stress that you're focused on. So we need that basic skill set to get a job. But in adult education, you also want people to have that critical thinking so that they start questioning the status quo that they're fitting into, and that the system that they're fitting into, right? So I've got a job at a minimum wage at a McDonald's. Is that enough for now? Yes. Is that enough for the next 6 months? Maybe. But is that enough for the rest of my life? No, I should be able to now assess the situation and say, I'm doing a great job now, maybe minimum wage is not it. Or we're all doing a great job and this system needs to change. We can do better things. So that kind of critical thinking skill is also something that we need to give our adult learners. So it's a combination of both of those things. And when we're thinking of all of those things, it can get daunting at times as educators to be like, oh my God, how do I do all this, right? I'm just one person and I can't be changing all of these things when I have a curriculum to do. And remember, organizationally, if you're training in an organization, you have organizational pressure as well. So with all of those things, how are you going to throw these things into it? So I don't have the perfect answer for it, or any answer, in fact. All I'll say is there are things that we need to think about as adult educators. And in this particular module, we're looking at learning as a process. And we're looking at learning as definitely not in isolation. So Dean, you said you were missing the classroom environment kind of thing, right? That social learning environment of it comes through very strongly in our readings. Hilaris talks about it with the triangular framework that he has. Baumgartner brings in culture as well. The culture and the social element of it is very strong in these readings that we're doing right now. And culture itself has many levels to understanding it. Culture is the culture that I grew up with, or my, which is the culture of my family, can be the culture of the society that I grew up in. It can be the organizational culture that I'm in. It can be the culture of the classroom itself. So all of those things are pieces of culture that will influence how you learn, right? How you learn and what you learn, in fact. So for example, think of cultures in the East. So I've lived in the East and moved around a lot of those countries. And one of the common things over there is this segregation of genders, right? And this innate, unquestionable belief that men are superior to women. It's in every aspect of language, it's in every aspect of society. And it is so much a part of culture that you don't even think about what you're learning over there. You're learning all this, but you're not learning it through lessons someone's teaching you or through readings. You're learning it through osmosis by what's happening around you. And so that's social learning, and that's the culture that's influencing you, right? So what is the culture that you're in? And how is that influencing the learning environment? Now, it can be a positive environment. Like, for example, if you listen to the Hidden Brain podcast, they talk about that medical environment where they started putting up the board that showed the numbers going up when people were washing their hands. You have positive reinforcement. It's a culture that is encouraging and building up people. And that automatically motivates everyone to do better, right? Now, if you listened to that same example very carefully, you'll notice that they were talking of percentages and numbers of people. They never identified a person individually. Now, that same leaderboard concept, think of it in a sales context. In some places, they have each salesperson's name listed out, and they will have how many sales that the person has made in a month or a week or whatever it is. So what is the culture that they are promoting? Is that the same positive culture that the medical thing was promoting? Or is that more of a negative culture, right? And what is it that they are teaching and telling the team? Because again, all of these are the unspoken cues that we're giving. So think about everything that surrounds the little things that we do as educators. Now, in an environment like this, right, how can I create a more welcoming culture for adult learners, right? A welcoming culture in this environment would be the fact that I'm not requiring you all to have your cameras turned on, right? I'm not requiring that you all speak up. I'm not forcing questions on you and having you speak up, because that's not my expectation here. I just want you to be here and feel comfortable enough to participate. I'm recording the session and I'm putting it out there so that people who cannot attend the session can watch it later. And so those are levels of flexibility that are built into this session to address the different needs of adult learners. So someone who does want to have face-to-face contact or does want this 1 hour of interaction, you have that available. If that's not your thing and you just prefer to read it and just get the job done, well, that option is there as well. So it's giving options that works very well with adult learners. Okay, now, if you're in the training field or you're working with adult learners, right, what is your thoughts on giving options to learners?
I think giving options to learners is great.
Okay, so what kinds of options would you give?
Well, I mean, okay, so for example, in my previous position, I was a museum educator. So I would frequently be in charge of various learning stations and interacting with various people of the public.
Mhm.
And I was always interested to know what they were interested in learning about.
Mm.
And I always asked them, and I wanted them to choose their option of what was out there, at least to talk about it. For example, if I had like a fossil table.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I guess I did have some constraints built in. I did choose the fossils. I placed them on the table, but
Right.
from there, people were able to kind of pick. So anyway, I welcome that kind of behavior. I like that.
Definitely. You're talking of agency, right? Giving them choice and at least as much flexibility as you can in that environment itself.
Correct.
Right. Dean?
Yes, I think options are great. Now, and what Jennifer was saying about constraining some of those options, because I've discovered that most people, unless they've evaluated early in their life, middle, and later, honestly don't know how they learn and where their learning strengths lie. And until you do a thorough analysis of that, sometimes people may pick an option that actually hinders their learning process rather than enhances it.
Good point. And we also have to, um, especially in some mandated courses kind of thing, when you have training and all that, right? Options can backfire. Sometimes people tend to take advantage if you give too much flexibility. So what you need to think about in these instances is, what is the end goal of this particular activity? Now, if it is very important that everyone turns up and does such and such a thing at this particular time together, and that's important to meeting the learning goal, then there are going to be no options, because you have a very set expected goal and objective there. But if that's not it, and it's more free and easy like this session, then it doesn't matter, right? So let the goals and objectives of any session or activity decide how much of flexibility you want to give people. Now, the problem we usually come up against is when we have organizations and you're doing training for people, organizations equate time in seat to learning. Meaning, if I have this person sitting in that seat for 2 hours, they have learned something. And it's amazing how much medical education does this. If you just sit in front of a computer and click next, next, next on a training, somehow you have learned it. And to move away from that concept and to tell them that, no, a person does not necessarily have to sit in the seat for 2 hours to be able to learn and do it, is very difficult. Simply because one of the easy things about time in seat is I can do a percentage of how many people were sitting in the seat, right? I can give you metrics for it. But I can't do that when things are a little bit more vague. But we know learning is a lot more complex than that. And we know how complex learning is because of all the learning theories that we have. I mean, why do we have so many learning theories? Because we all learn so very differently. We all learn differently in different contexts. We need different theories for different pieces of information that we're learning. And so with all the levels of complexity, you just end up with a multitude of learning theories. So there is a place for behaviorism. Sometimes there is information that you just have to memorize. There is no question about that, right? If I go to a doctor, I expect him to have basic information that he can just tell me without Googling it in front of me. That's going to raise questions for me. So those are things where I expect them to have gone through a behavioristic teaching environment and be able to memorize things. But at the same time, I also want to have given someone the ability to have practiced it, put it into practice, applied the learning. So we do case-based scenarios or problem-based learning. We do, so problem-based learning would fall under constructivism. You also think about how to present information to people. So we go into cognitive learning, cognitive theories and cognitive load theories of chunking and germane load. So all of these things play together to create an effective learning environment. So as you move through this course and you're looking at different learning theories, remember there is no one perfect theory at all. Theories change. You have complete freedom to adopt the theory that is most effective for the situation, for the learners involved, for the content that you're teaching. All of that fits into the theory that you're going to select. What is important for you as master's learners to be able to do is, when you've developed a learning environment, you should be able to take a step back and justify why you designed that the way you designed it. So if you're going to put people, have people read 10 pages and do a multiple choice quiz at the end of it, you need to be able to justify it and say, I'm using a behavioristic theory, behavioristic approach over here because da 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 da. And it's that because da 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 da, that's what sets you apart from anyone else. Everyone else, through practice, we've all seen good teachers, we've all seen bad teachers. We take some of the practices from people we see and we put it into practice, and we could be great teachers. So what's separating you as a master's learner? The ability to justify what you're doing based in theory. So think of those things as you're reading these theories and how you're going to be applying it. Who is your learner? Who are you working with right now? If you're not teaching, that's okay. I mean, every environment now has some kind of training, right? So if you're sitting through training, how could you make that training better? Is another question that you want to ask. Also take a critical view of, what training have they used over here? And what are they trying to do here? So those are all questions that you could ask as well. All right, so this was just a broad random rambling about learning and learning theories that we have for the first module. I did touch on all the readings that you have over here. I definitely like the brain basics reading because of that little brain, that cute little graphic that they had going, broke the monotony, made me smile a bit. So hopefully that was entertaining as well. I personally like the Hidden Brain podcasts a lot. So I've subscribed to it. And as he comes up with new things, I'm always listening to it. And I find podcasts great for when I'm trying to get a walk in or something, just listening to it, or during commutes. So those are things that you could think about as well. Podcast is a great tool nowadays. And so again, that is another learning aspect, right? That we now have information available in so many modalities that you do want to capitalize on that when you're working with adult learners. Now, with adult learners, something like a podcast is effective because time is a problem for them. And so giving them flexibility this way is helpful so that they can get the same content, but through another modality. I find it very surprising. I work with doctors now, and I have quite a few doctors who've told me, I don't like to read. I'm like, how did you ever become a doctor? But they just don't like to spend a lot of time reading through pages and pages of textbooks. And so for them, you give them podcasts and they're all over it. So it's that flexibility, which is why you need a variety of theories and approaches. Okay, so that's all I have, and I'm going to stop right there, but I will touch on the discussion board and a bit about the assignments maybe. So today is the deadline for the initial posting, and it looks like I think all of you have posted, and that's great. So the next few days, what you're going to do is basically to go back, read everyone else's posts, and make your responses as well. So I explained in the beginning, make sure you're giving some in-depth responses. You have anything from 3 to 5 responses. I've put you in pretty big groups, so it should be easy to find people to respond to. And when someone responds to your post, do take some time to read what they have said. And if they have asked a question, respond to the question that they've posed. It's kind of like having a conversation and someone asked me a question, but I just completely ignore the question that they posed me. We would never do that in a face-to-face environment unless we were like, very intentionally being mean to that person. We don't want to do that online, right? So it's the same process. If someone asks you a question, politeness, answer them, right? And that'll keep the conversation going and it'll build relationships. Remember, you're going to be in this group for the next, 14 to 16 weeks. So you'll get to know each other pretty well. Okay, so that is the discussion board for this week. We don't have any other assignments this week, which is good. Next, in module 2, we will end with the learner autobiography. So I'll talk about how to do that assignment in the next module. All right, so Dean and Jennifer, any other questions or thoughts you had?
No. The only thing I get a little mixed up going from group to group. And just a question about the links. When you click on the group and respond, it goes to the right place automatically, correct?
Yes. Okay, Dean, are you sitting in front of your computer with your Canvas open in front of you?
I am actually, yes.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording. I'm